So in a couple of my most recent live streams from the studio, I got asked, what is that MIDI controller that's sitting on my desk? It's not the Ableton Push, it's actually the Pioneer Toraz Squid, and I love this bit of kit. It's now my main MIDI controller in the studio. So why do I love it so much? That's what I thought I'd answer in this video. So if you haven't seen this bit of kit yet, it's the Pioneer Toraz Squid, and it's basically a MIDI controller and MIDI sequencer all in one. It's meant to be the kind of hub where you link all of your external instruments into it and sequence them all from here. If you haven't seen it already, I did a video a few months ago where I took all of my external equipment and sequenced it all from the Squid. So I had the Pioneer SP16, the AS1 and my Yamaha Reface CP, all sequenced from here, and it worked really well. But as well as having normal MIDI out on the back of here, you've also got USB MIDI out as well, which means you can also use it with a DAW. And ever since I started playing around with it in Ableton and using it that way and using it as a MIDI controller, honestly, it's become my main MIDI controller within Ableton now because it works so well. So why do I like it so much? Why do I prefer it over something like the Push? Well, it's actually quite small. It kind of fits nicely on your desk. It's got a very kind of slim profile to it. So it's actually quite nice just to sit behind my keyboard. Also, I really love the pads. It sounds like a really strange thing, but just the pads have got a really nice feel to it. It's also USB powered, which means it's one less plug socket for my studio. And also there's just so many creative controls within here. You can see over here we have all the pads, but on the left hand side, we've got all these amazing creative controls for doing stuff with MIDI. Honestly, once you start playing around with them, there's some amazing stuff you can do. Now, obviously it's not going to be as tightly integrated as the Ableton Push. That's meant to go with Ableton. This is just a MIDI controller. And yes, there are a few issues with kind of playing drum racks. But generally, as a MIDI controller, this works so well. And when it comes to melodies, well, there's just so many creative stuff you can do with it. By the way, if you're liking this t-shirt, I've just launched a brand new store with a whole load of designs that are made for DJs and producers. So definitely check that out. I'll put the link up there and in the description. So let me show you how I've got the Squid set up within Ableton. So at the moment, we're in the preferences under the MIDI tab. And if I turn the Squid on, we'll now see that it automatically pops up within here. I'm connected via USB out the back of the Squid and obviously into my computer. And this has now automatically recognized it. Now, if you're on the PC, you might need a driver for the Squid to work, but on the Mac, it just showed up just fine. So within the MIDI preferences, I've already got a couple of surfaces set up here. I've got a keyboard and also the Push as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a brand new within here. And this is going to be the Toraz Squid on the input and on the output. Next up on the MIDI ports, on the input, I turn the track on so that it's available on all of these tracks here. So whatever comes in from the Squid will then be available on the inputs of the individual tracks. And then on the output, I'm going to turn sync on because I want to be able to sync Ableton to the Squid and I want Ableton to drive the Squid. So Ableton has the master clock. Now I have noticed that I do need to add a delay on there. It's actually a minus delay just to kind of pull it in a little bit. Now this delay might be different for you depending on your setup, your computer speed and everything else like that. I know mine is minus 28 milliseconds. It's something I took me a little while to kind of figure out. It was just a case of playing stuff on the Squid and seeing how it recorded it in. And I gradually got to about 28 milliseconds, minus 28 milliseconds. And that was a good kind of delay for me. So I've now got that set up within the preferences. There are a couple of settings that you need to change on the Squid. So if you go into the global and if you scroll all the way down, what we're looking for is the sync settings. Now there's so many different options within here, but that's the one we're looking for, sync source. And you want to make sure this is set to USB MIDI because obviously the USB MIDI is coming in and that's going to be the sync source. So we're going to go from Ableton into here. So I want to make sure that that is then set. So by default, when you turn the Squid on, it'll actually open with the last project that you had saved. So what I'm going to do, just to show you how I set it all up, I'm going to go to global and I'm going to create a brand new project within here. And this is basically, this new project is how I want to set it up. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to set up the individual tracks. So basically on the Squid, we have 16 different tracks, basically 16 different devices that we can control with the Squid. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to map each one of these tracks to the individual tracks within Ableton. So the first thing I'm going to do on the Squid is actually for each individual track within here, and I can select each individual track just by selecting it on here. I'm then going to change the output. So by default, it's going out on MIDI 1, channel 1. Now this is the DIN MIDI, not the USB MIDI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the settings knob here. I'm going through all the channels, and then it will go on to MIDI port 2, and then go through all the channels on there. And then finally, it will get to USB. So you can see now that we have USB channel 1. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to move on to the second track, which as you can see is set to MIDI 1 channel 2. And again, I'm going to set this to USB. And I'm going to set this to USB channel 2. So I'm just going to go through each one of these. I'm going to set this to channel 3. So as you can see here, I have track 1 on channel 1, 2, and then 3. And I've actually got 6 tracks within my Ableton project. So I'm actually going to set this up for the first 6 pads. So again, on track number 4, I'm going to set this as USB channel 4. And then 5. And then 6. So we can see now we have USB channel 1, USB channel 2, USB channel 3, USB channel 4, 5, and then 6. Next up, I'm going to go into Ableton and I'm going to assign those MIDI channels to the various channels here. So I'm going to select all of these channels, and then I'm going to select the input as the Taurus Squid. And then next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a channel to each one. So the kick here is going to assign to channel 1. So everything that comes out of the Taurus Squid on channel 1 is going to go into that kick. Channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, channel 5, channel 6. So as you can see there, we set the output on the Squid and then the inputs within Ableton, and those are all set up ready to use now. And one final thing that I must remember to do is select all of these tracks again and set them all to the input. So they're just waiting for an input from the Squid. So let's hit play within Ableton. And we can see the Squid is now in sync with Ableton. We can see that the BPM is being read by the Squid here. We can see it's 124, the same as my Ableton project. So let's start getting some sounds in there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first track within here, which is going to be my kick. The track section within the Squid basically allows you to choose which track you're then going to be programming it on. Now, the first thing I want to show you with this is the step sequencer. So if I go into the trigger section, we can now see these pads are lighting up in that kind of standard step sequencer kind of way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now put a kick in on the 4/4. Now, as you can see at the moment, this is just 1 bar's length, but I can actually make this longer if I want to. So I'm going to take that last note off, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and increase the page length. And now what I can do is I can go through these and put the kick in. So we now have 4 bars worth. Right, so let's get a clap in there. I'm going to go back to the track section and I'm going to select track number 2 and then back to the step sequencer again, the trigger tab. And I'll put a clap in there. As you can see on this second track, we've only got 1 bar's length. But if I go back to track 1, you can see we got 4 bars length. So you can actually have a different bar length for every single track, which is really handy. So next up, let's get some hi-hats in there. I'm going to go over to track number 3, back into the step sequencer. And let's get a closed hat in there as well. So that's sounding quite static so far, but we have a whole load of cool controls over here, including this great swing control. I absolutely love this. We can dial a certain amount of swing into every single track. So it's not a case of all the tracks having the same swing. You can actually dial a different amount of swing into every single track. So I can dial some swing into these closed hats. I love that feature. It's called the Groove Bend, and basically it's a little trigger almost. It's almost like playing with a computer game, and you can make something slower or faster. It's kind of interesting to get some interesting grooves with that. So far it's pretty basic. Let's get into some more of the creative stuff. And I'm going to move on to the bass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to track number 5, which is our bass. And now I'm going to start putting a step sequence in of the bass, but we can start using some really interesting controls over here. Now, obviously that's way too high for a bass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it down in pitch. And again, I can dial a bit of swing into it as well. So it's kind of cool working with a step sequencer and putting notes in like this. But when we start using these features over here, this is where it really starts to get very, very interesting. The running direction is an amazing little feature for coming up with other ideas. And I use this all the time because it has a kind of unpredictable kind of nature as to maybe making a groove that you wouldn't have thought of. So the step sequencer by default will go through it in normal order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. But with the running direction, we can kind of change the direction that it goes. So at the moment it's going left to right. And what we can do is we can change the direction and come up with a different groove entirely. So as you can see, it really offers a really different variation on something that you put in. So you could put a few notes in there and it might not be quite right. And you can kind of play around with these different directions and come up with a different kind of groove. It's great for kind of sparking ideas. And I kind of use this all the time just to kind of figure out if there's other ways of doing something. So if I'm not feeling inspired with the pattern that I put in on here already, then I can kind of play with those directions and kind of come up with something really interesting. Next up, let's move on to the keys, because I really want to show you the chord part of this, and it really works quite nicely. So I'm going to switch over to my keys track, which is track number 6. Got that set up on there. And this time I'm actually going to go into the scale section. So this works just like a keyboard. You can actually play the instrument just as you would like that. Now there's some really cool features within this scale section. Now at the moment we're set to C as our key, and I can actually change this by holding shift and turning the scale knob here, which allows me to change it to a different key. Now I'm not going to change it to a different key because we've got the bass already in C anyway, but what I can also do is I can actually change the scale. At the moment it's on chromatic, but I can actually change this to any other kind of scale that's within here. So for example, if I want to go for a minor scale, for example, it will then only light up the pads that are within that scale, and any other pad that's not lit up, it will do the nearest note, which is really handy for staying within the key. So if you want to jam out while you're kind of playing along, then you can actually stay in key the whole time. Now, obviously we can do this within Ableton using the scale plugin, but it's just really kind of nice to have that built into this unit. Now, another feature that I really love is this harmonizer section down the bottom here. This allows you to play preset chords. So each one of these buttons represents a certain chord, and when you hold it down and then press a note, it will play that chord. And you can switch up the chords as you play. And of course, you can customize any one of these buttons. Just holding down Shift and clicking on the button allows you to then select whichever chord you want to. There's a whole load of great ones already built into the unit that you can select from within there. And as you can see, as I'm scrolling through these, the individual pads are lighting up, showing the notes that are going to be held for that chord. And you can actually go further and then customize these. So I could actually put another few notes within here if I wanted to, and build that chord to be whatever I want to. And if I like the sound of something, then I can actually hit record on the unit here, and I can actually record these notes into the unit, so it's actually on that track. And from there, I can also then change the running direction and come up with another groove. Okay, so that isn't exactly a masterpiece. That's not going to be my next track, but hopefully you can kind of see where I'm coming from when I say I really love this bit of kit, because the right hand side here, this is kind of what we're used to. We're used to kind of sequencing things up in this kind of way, but it's the left side of the unit where it really comes alive. All these kind of creative controls around here really kind of spin that idea that you have on its head and really send it off in unpredictable kind of ways. That's why I kind of love this side of the unit, and it sparks so many ideas, so many track ideas for me. And I haven't even touched on a lot of the features that are on the left hand side here, like there is an art built into here. We have all these rhythmic controls under it, and I only really kind of played around a little bit with that groove bend, but there's just so much stuff that you can do with this unit that just makes me love it more and more each day. So once I've gone through and I've come up with my idea on the Squid, I then want to get it into Ableton so I can start playing around with it some more in there. And that's really easy to do. All I need to do is just select all of the tracks that I want to record, arm them for record, and then just hit the record button. And then I just make sure that I turn the input off. So hopefully you can see why I like this bit of kit so much and why it's become my main MIDI controller. It just allows me to be so creative with it. There's so many functions in there that give me so many ideas. And yes, every now and again, I will plug in a MIDI keyboard just to kind of put some notes in, but generally this is always plugged in and it's always what I go to first. And until the Ableton Push 3 comes out, I think this is still going to remain my main MIDI controller. So if you get a chance to check it out, I definitely recommend you do. And if this video has been useful to you, then definitely subscribe to my channel. I've got a whole load more content like this on there. So definitely get subscribed, check out the rest of the stuff on there, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next video.